Hey, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Bytes Brew. I'm Terry McGraw from Cape and Nevis Incorporated, and today we're joined by the team from Teramis, a partner company of ours that provide a unique capability in this space. Today's episode, we're going to cover a few things, sort of trends we see in the path to certification and obtaining CMMC assessment and certification, challenge we see with small business and large enterprise alike. We'll talk about some of the nuances there, and we'll also talk about Teramis and the product and how it's really blazing a trail for helping companies to scope, understand their CUI problem, where it's at, help limit how much they actually need to address in the data flow questions, as well as eliminate possible CUI spillage in their environment. So a lot to cover today. We're gonna keep a pretty tight cadence in our webinar. So I'm going to tee up just some questions to the group. And so to Cape Endeavors and Teramis. By the way, I'm joined by Dewayne Alford, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Cape Endeavors. I'm joined by Brandon Session, who is the President of Teramis Software, and the Chief Technology Officer of Teramis, which is also Andy Paul. So I will just sort of tee up in general questions to you. So the first one I'm gonna start with Dewayne. A lot of DIB companies hear CMMC, and two things happen. Number one, they're still under this delusion that it's somehow going to go away, even though they're looking at literally the deadline facing them right in the face. I don't think a lot of folks understand that this literally will put them out of the ability to compete for new contracts, and certainly not be able to renew the ones that they have if they don't obtain this. But there seems to still be a lot of feet dragging or ostrich playing with their head in the sand. But then we also hear folks struggling with the cost of CMMC compliance. And personally, and I've said this on several episodes, I'm not actually swayed by that argument. I think that we've been attesting for many, many, many years that we're adhering to NIST 800-171. It has been a part of the DFARS for a very long time. And so to now somehow say it's too onerous in cost, I think is disingenuous, and kind of does fly almost at a False Claims Act. But I don't think it's deliberate. I actually think that most companies think they are much more compliant and secure than they are. And so just to that end, Dewayne, we brought a lot of companies successfully through their assessment. What are you seeing as far as the struggle with cost, and the struggle with where they think they are in getting compliant, and what makes our solutions unique?
Yeah, that's a great set of questions you got in there. So I'll start with the timeline thing that you brought up, right? It's, this has been around a long time. People have been saying they're compliant for a long time. If they've been doing the work that's been defined for many years, the cost and the timeline isn't that big of a struggle, right? It's the biggest cost that they're introducing is the cost of the assessment. I think that what we are noticing people are running up against is their scope, right? They don't understand their scope. And if you don't understand your scope, you don't understand your boundaries, you don't understand what you're actually attesting to as being compliant. The biggest factors that go into that is really defining your asset list and how your data flows through your environment, and who touches your CUI and what touches your CUI. If you can get that under control, you can get your environment pretty well scoped and pretty well compliant pretty quickly. The way we do it, right, is we try to eliminate as much physical scope as possible, right? And we do that through our enclave services and the ability to basically say, look, anything beyond the cloud, not in scope. That's not always 100% bulletproof, right? You do have to bring some environments, some of their physical in scope. But the right way to do it as fast as possible is to narrow that scope, and if you can keep it cloud only, you can do it pretty quickly and pretty cost effectively.
Andy, I'll tee this up. You're a lead assessor as well. You've also helped many, many, many companies get through this successfully. You've been the representative as an RPO for joint surveillance, DIBCAC high assessments, third-party assessing organizations. There's probably not a third-party assessing organization that you haven't spoke to at this point. So I'll tee up kind of the same question. What struggles are you seeing in the market in general? And what are the biggest misconceptions you see around sort of CMMC compliance? Where customers or clients or prospects or OSCs are getting it wrong, and attempting to do it themselves.
Yeah, sure. The biggest thing that I've seen, it's a kind of repeated mistake that keeps happening over and over and over by companies is, first they'll skip scoping. They'll just come at it with a solution they think they already have, and then never try to understand what piece of my environment do I need to apply all these controls to, or just don't understand that concept at all. They'll skip it because it's not solving the problem yet. It's more so like trying to identify where it is, and it feels kind of wonky. Why would I need to scope? I need to just go ahead and start fixing problems. So a lot of them skip that the first time, and then they realize they got to go back to doing scoping. And then how you actually do scoping as a thing, well, what companies are doing is they'll go and they'll just start trying to interview people, and they'll ask questions, and they'll go to different people and start maybe it sells and try to follow it through. But the problem whenever they're asking these questions is you run into like an immediate garbage in, garbage out problem. You're just trying to determine that scope. So you're asking, hey, do you work with CUI? And the person goes, yeah, I work with CUI every day. And then you ask them to show you a document that has CUI on it, and they can't find one because they've never actually seen CUI. They're just assuming a definition for it. So then you end up making decisions based off of false information that comes in, and you end up spinning your wheels. And honestly, thousands and tens of thousands of dollars of bringing in consultants just trying to understand the same problem. Where what is my scope? Because there's not really been a technical discovery capability in the past, and that's really that problem. Being able to, cause, like Dwayne was saying, once you have a scope, once you know what it is you're actually trying to solve and what you're applying those 320 objectives to, the solution is blatantly obvious in front of you. Like, hey, this is how I need to apply that. That's the thing I need to install. That's the thing I need to configure correctly. Like, the answer to all those questions, but if you haven't figured that out, if you don't know what that scope is, you're just constantly spinning your wheels. Everything's vague, doesn't make sense. You're like trying to provide answers, but you don't actually know what the answer applies to. And that's what really led us to the idea of trying to create a technical discoveries tool to enumerate that problem for them so they can, solve based off of data, not solve based off of feeling.
Yeah, I think most people don't understand, or they don't take the time to understand, that this is a data flow problem, as you articulated. The DoD does not care about your operational, they do, tangentially. Like, they want their delivery of the capability. But that's not their problem. Their problem is, we gave you sensitive data, we expect you to handle it appropriately. And where that data touches, anything that stores, processes, or transmits is now in scope. And I don't think people understand it is about the data flow, it's not a systems view, it's not a operations view, it's a data flow view. And Brandon, as Teramis has come to be, and it addresses a lot of these issues. But can you tell us, sort of from your perspective, in the scoping piece, where people are getting this wrong?
Well, I think that in the scoping piece, they try to attack a problem like Andy was talking about earlier with the assumption. So they assume that it's everywhere, or they assume that they don't have any at all, right? There's very small number of solutions in the marketplace that have even looked at trying to identify CUI or ITAR data for companies. The reason why Teramis was created, it was purpose-built for that, right? These other solutions focus on a lot of other different compliance vectors, GDPR, PCI, HIPAA, et cetera. So they haven't really paid a lot of attention to CMMC, the CUI and ITAR discovery-related aspects of that. So their efficacy of their tools are not there. We run up against tools all the time where they might think that a circuit drawing is CUI or a biscuit recipe is CUI, but of course it's not. Right. The reason why we're different is that we take the assumptions out of the equation. We look at the things and what they truly are. We give hard data that clients can actually use. We're involved in DOJ CID cases where you have to be precise. And I think that's what makes us different than everybody else. And that visibility that we've got, which we call the I inside of our product, is something that gives them that visibility of what they need so they can make decisions off of that, right? It's like I was talking to somebody earlier today, and we were talking about how some people can actually take a set of plans when they're building a home, and they can visualize it in their brains of what those walls are going to look like, and what the doors are going to look like, and the cabinets and the countertops and everything else. There are other people that actually need it truly visually represented for them to understand it. That is what Teramis does versus no other tool inside the marketplace. We will actually visually allow you to understand where that data is so that you can make the right decisions on your scope, so that you don't make the cost ineffective decisions of moving forward with lifting your entire environment, over buying on licenses if you're going to go down the enclave route, et cetera. Because we've got clients that have thousands of employees and would have went out and spent millions and millions of dollars on Microsoft licenses, but at the end of the day, they spent a fraction of that. They were able to use Teramis to answer those questions for them, and they cost avoided those millions of dollars, and it paid for itself, right?
Yep. Pivoting a little bit on the cost piece, clearly scoping is one of the first things you can do. Number one, I think not scoping and scoping well starts you on a bad path to begin with. Making assumptions, as Brandon said, about where CUI is in your environment, how many people touch it, is it even there? Do you have ITAR data restrictions? Like not only understanding where CUI is, but is it CUI basic? Is it CUI specified? Do you have categories that you have to consider? But those are kind of just in the upfront costs that people are either getting wrong or balking at. But I don't think people are fully appreciating the cost of keeping something managed, maintained, and compliant over time, right? This is not just a one and done thing, right? I mean, this is not a rubber stamp activity, which is why we're seeing the DOJ doing CID for false claims acts. There has to be an ongoing maintenance of this. So, Dewayne, back to you. When you're looking at sort of how companies are approaching this from a cost perspective, do you see them planning this out over a full life cycle, or are they just looking at like the upfront cost? I mean, do they think they can do this or do it well, once they've gotten a solution or not?
Yeah, I think they're looking at a point in time. If I can just get to this assessment, I'll be good, right? If I can get this assessment done, get that certification, I can go make all the money I need to make from the DoD. That's actually false, right? Because what will end up happening is you'll have what I call drift, right? You'll go through this assessment, you'll do all this flurry of activity, get all the 110 controls put in, get everything ready to go, you'll get the assessment in, you'll get it done, and then in literally 6 months you could be completely out of compliance, right? You could have gaps in your environment, things like that, which is kind of the unique approach that we take when we manage our customers' environments. Is our focus isn't on the onboarding and all of that stuff, right? It's obviously that's a requirement, but our focus is on the compliance management, right? We throw a truckload of resources at just managing our clients' compliance, and we do that because we don't want that drift. We want to be able to get them assessment ready, and at any time in the life cycle, they look at us and we can confidently say you're assessment ready, right? And that's the way we do things, because we put in change management, we put in configuration controls, we put in monitoring, and then we put governance over the top of all that to maintain it throughout the entire life cycle. And I think that's the big gap that people are going to miss, that's going to bite them, is that that governance and oversight that's keeping everything in check, making sure all changes that impact policy result in a policy change, right? Those sort of things. That's going to bite some folks, I have a feeling, just based off the things I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm. Andy, that same question to you from an assessor's perspective, helping companies get ready to do this. And as Dewayne said, this is all about compliance change management, right? This is and the archival evidence that you have to suggest you're actually doing it. Can you sort of give your perspective on how that's being done, or how folks are not doing it that causes them problems?
Yeah, in my opinion, there's two pieces of that. One, you go up through your reassessment, and we're just now getting to the points where some of those early joint surveillance companies are going through their reassessment. So when you're going through it the first time, it's like, hey, this was new. I don't have 3 years worth of artifacts to show for something, but you lose that kind of out whenever you're doing a re-authentication, that third year down the road. And so the assessor's fully within their right to be like, show me 2 years ago where you redid that. policy, or you redid, whatever the thing was, looking that you were actually following your configuration management plans and all that stuff throughout the last 3-year period. That the lack of, if you didn't do that the whole time, kind of what Dewayne was referring to, or if you drifted out 6 months after and didn't fix it immediately, but rather waited till 6 months before your next assessment to start trying to do it again and take it seriously, there's going to be a 2-year hole there. And so now you're just praying that the assessor doesn't ask for an artifact during that period of time. Right? That's assessment risk that you're introducing there. Aside from that is the concept that when you go through your assessment, people put too much weight on what that assessment means. They think, well, I'm certified, therefore I don't have to worry about any more risk inside of this. However, your C3PO assessed a scope that you told them. So you said, hey, my CUI is always going to be inside of this enclave or inside of this boundary, these designated sources of destinations of CUI. And if you haven't actually been controlling it to that, you've been letting salespeople run amok and put it wherever they want to, something like that's occurring where it's not being controlled through the flow that you put in place, that assessment didn't actually protect you from that. So that's where this kind of Department of Justice, the CID inquiry would come in. A whistleblower comes out and says, hey, I've been using it outside of this whole time. And then, now you got to get justified. And that's why having something like spillage management in place to make certain that the controls are being enforced, that if CUI does make it outside of your boundary, that you can find it and put it back into the boundary, so that those controls are in place. There's two pieces to it. One is continuing to do that stuff week by week, month over month for that next 3-year period, which never ends. And then also making certain that people aren't just coming up with a creative way to work around your controls because they just don't like it and are just being grumpy and I'm not going to do that and by the way I can do it this way and just continue to work on it outside of it.
Yeah, users will do that. We're going to dig in to the Teramis solution and sort of the use cases that address here shortly. I just kind of want to finish up the misconceptions around cost. I hear a lot of folks saying it's too expensive for a small business, et cetera, and that's interesting. And we're in the unique position, just to sort of give some background. We're large in the defense industrial base. In many instances, you'll have super large companies that are actually the subs to small business that are the primes. And so the CMMC articulates the float down requirements, meaning me as the prime to my subordinates that will exchange CUI from. But a unique sort of phenomenon is arising that we've seen in our own customer base where they kind of have flow up requirements, meaning like I won't get the business if my primes are not compliant. And so they have a serious issue or concern about are the primes that my flow up capabilities, are they actually compliant? And so when I hear people saying, oh, the cost of compliance is so high, again, I have this allergic reaction to that. And as much as we want to help solve this, and we do have some ways to help solve this, it's not as expensive as doing it wrong. We have several customers that came to us after trying to do it on their own or doing it with an unqualified RPO, and they found themselves paying for assessment, paying for a lot of work, paying for a lot of consultants, and hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars later, they're no further than they were. So, I've made the comment that for most small businesses, you can do this for one or for less than one full-time employee. So, what are the other costs? When you hear that this is too expensive, what's your experience with that? Like, what is a company actually, not large enterprise, but like a small to mid-sized enterprise? What are the kind of the costs that are appropriate to estimate for compliance? Whoever wants to answer that one.
Yeah, and I don't mind adding in. I led a advisory practice for a long time at Gray Analytics, and what we saw with businesses is that they. I think Andy even mentioned earlier they're humans. They're just trying to find the loophole, right? I mean, the businesses all the time are trying to say, okay, how can I check the box? How can I move forward? What can I do to make sure that this is not going to impact me, but I can still get that contract, right? I can still make sure that I support my team and my people and my livelihood, right? I think that we've seen companies over the time in our collective history of and experience in the space. There are companies out there that desperately just want to do the right thing. They do. They want to protect their people. They want to protect the data. They want to do the right things, but they run into a situation to where there's a lot of FUD inside of the space. So when you talk about how they budget, they don't know where to start. It's like the unicorn of marketing, right? We'll use that maybe for other people to understand that. You really don't know how much money you're supposed to spend in marketing. You have no idea. Like, you can spend money, might work, might not. You're just kind of going on a belief. Cybersecurity is in that way of, you're going to spend money on it, but if you don't hear anything and nothing happens, you go, oh, well, did I spend the right amount? Or did I not spend enough? Or was I just lucky? Right? And we've always went with everybody's going to be breached at some point in time, right? No matter who you are, you're going to be breached. And for the probability of that, yes, everybody's going to be breached at some point in time. But spending money inside of those things and protecting that data is a requirement of your contracts. Mm-hmm. And to move forward with that, there are basic things that you need to figure out. So a lot of organizations, before they ever go down the line, they need to understand if they're level 1 or level 2. To be level 2, you're going to deal with CUI or ITAR data, right? So inside of that, we use our solution to help companies with scoping all the time. If they don't have any CUI or ITAR data inside of their environment and their prime contractor is not requiring them to be compliant, and they're not going to go after a contract that requires CMMC Level 2 compliancy, then they only need to worry about level 1. And level 1, to achieve level 1 in its most simplistic form, is something that's very easy for any firm to do because there's only 15 controls associated with that, right? Simple things like antivirus, et cetera, right? There's not a reason why a firm can't be level 1 is the thought process in that, right? But making the decision to move forward to go after a CMMC Level 2 contract or to work with a prime contractor that's going to require you to be CMMC Level 2, that's when you have to bring in the additional things to your business that are more than the NIST CSF baseline things of stuff, right? You have to be 800-171, which is going to have all 110 controls, right? All 320 objectives. And so finding the right provider that's not just trying to sell you something through FUD, fear and uncertainty, right? But is actually looking at your bottom line should be the firms that are out there saying, well, let's look at where you deal with CUI and ITAR data on a daily basis. If you don't know how to answer the question, well, guess what? I got a solution for you, right? But if you do have that answer and you've got a great provider that's going to help you with that, they shouldn't be looking to sell you as many licenses as possible. They should be looking to sell you the right number of licenses to be compliant, right? Or the right solution to be compliant. That's how you're going to budget off of things. You can't just go out there and use the defense data out there to put together a budget, because if you look at the defense numbers on what the budget should be, these companies wouldn't be in business for the majority of the ones that are inside the defense industrial base, because they don't have the funds to afford that, because they haven't been planning for that for years inside of their budgets. And for them to overhaul their systems and do what they need to do is not something they can do overnight, right? So it's a crawl, walk, run method, right? Where are you going to start? You got to start somewhere.
That begs the question, what it really does is, and this is why we're seeing False Claims Act, is that people have just assumed they were doing the right thing, right? Oh, my environment is totally fine. And then, of course, they find out that it's not through and the DoD was right to enforce third party, because this assumption that I'm good has been the reason why so much of our data has flown. And I say our data, it's taxpayer money that's funding this data. Our data, taxpayers, is going out the door to our adversaries because companies haven't stopped to ensure they're doing the right thing and doing it. And to this day, in fact, we were just talking about this morning with companies and our prospects arguing that we use cell phones. Like, we've had this come up multiple times where people have developed workflows using technology to make the process easier and not given 2 seconds to the thought about what happens to the data on those devices. Like, so for example, we have some customers that go around and they use their personal cell phones to take pictures and to do documentation, and they take that back and they build out stuff with that. Not understanding that that's going to be compiled into something that is CUI. So essentially, when it's sent back to them, they're receiving it on personal devices or laptops, and then they take those laptops to Starbucks and they take those laptops home, and so essentially what you're saying when you take that approach is that you're moving CUI everywhere where it's not supposed to be. And the controls in your bring your own devices and the controls for observation things or physical security when you're out and about using your mobile devices is not compliant. And then when you tell a customer that, oh, well, you really got to think about how you do this differently, they've built a culture around ease of production, not security or compliance. And so then you get this argument, well, how do I keep what I'm currently doing and make it compliant? Like, can I just keep doing the things that we're doing? Like, can I just add all my laptops into the environment? Can I just bring, how do I make the personal cell phones compliant? Those are good questions to ask, but the actual question is, how should we be handling the DoD data initially? And so in the scoping, understanding cost, and understanding the network, Cape Endeavors, largely through the efforts of the folks that you're looking at, decided that the easiest path forward, the most cost-effective, efficient, and most effective way to get, maintain, and stay compliant is with an enclave. So I'll start. Dewayne, I'll let you tee it up, then I'll pivot over to Andy and Brandon. Tell us sort of why an enclave is the most effective way to approach this, whether they be a small business or a large enterprise or a global enterprise, because we have those as well.
The reason it's the most effective is because it's the easiest way to narrow scope, right? Yeah. We've talked about scope this whole conversation. It's kind of interesting that the whole thing circles around knowing what's processing CUI and who's doing it. And that's what an enclave does. And if you're a small business, it's the least impactful to how you do business by doing an enclave and spinning it up only for the users that are going to be working with the DoD. And on the flip side, for a large organization, some of our, G5 and all that, it's actually the exact same thing, but it's bringing it down, right? So it's saying, all right, we got all of this business, 100,000 people all over the place. We're only going to build it for the people that actually need to do this thing, and so that's what we do. And it saves cost on the small business, and it reduces cost burden on the large companies by doing it that way.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to pivot a little bit over to Teramis. I want to give sort of equal time and measure. Teramis was a tool born of necessity. Cape Endeavors as a company had struggled with helping customers figure out their scope. And oftentimes it was we had customers come to us because of CIDs. They were called out on it. We've had companies come to us after a breach for cybercrime, where DoD data may or may not have gone out the back door. And so as a consequence, you have to then be able to identify what was in my environment, what is in my environment, and what's in scope for the remediation piece. And what we found is that a lot of companies have DLP solutions. They have data and file management processes, but and they're supposed to have data tagging, but none of these were very effective for lots of reasons. None of them were kind of focused on this. And then so when we looked at the field of view, we looked at who's the leaders in this space for data discovery, e-discovery tools, who's the leaders of DLP. And we pressure tested all of them, and none of them were any good. And so Teramis was one of the few was the only solution that we found that it was born out of necessity and born out of design to answer these kind of questions. And so the market is starting to like AI, but the problem set really is actually more nuanced, and the realities are far more harsh. When you hear people throwing about AI solutions, it's very problematic in the environments we're talking about. So I'm gonna throw this over to Andy really quick to tee up sort of sort of Teramis and what makes Teramis unique, and why it solves a problem that others don't.
Yeah, I think the biggest single thing that makes Teramis unique is that it'll actually find your data at rest that is actually CUI. Everything else is looking for kind of data in motion. It'll examine it once it's opened. So on DLP things, like, oh, you tried to send something that had, 4 digits, dash 4 digits, dash 4 digits, dash 4 digits. So it looks like you may be trying to send a credit card number over an email. And my company doesn't want to be able to do that, so we'll stop it, right? The solutions don't go back through and look at data at rest and try to make determinations on whether it's there or not. So when we talk about inside of the CMC, when it adds in a thing like it says, hey, where's the designated sources and destination? Where's that CUI at the entire time, including where it's just happened to be stored at? That becomes a very difficult problem to solve with any of the other tools. A lot of the tools are also very centric to a type of data, right? Like Purview's going to examine all your Microsoft stuff very well, but it's not going to go out and look at PDF files that are stored on on-premise servers, right? And, not without some very heavy, handed, kind of manipulations to get that to work. So that's where it's different, is that it's actually looking through the entirety of your data set, not just the active or hydrated data that you're currently processing at the time, in order for you to actually get that out of your environment. I mean, this is all just a game of liability reduction. If you've got CUI sitting in a place that you're not hardening to be compliant, that is a liability for your company. Like, you need to get that out of there, or else you're carrying all of this risk, all the the cost associated with that risk. You're carrying on your books, you're just not putting a line item in for it, so you're actually overinflating your numbers. Like, there is some serious risk. This problem can be referred to as tech debt, all these different things that you've got out there. The easiest way to remove that risk is to remove that data from your environment. That data is a vulnerability. It is a problem on your side. And until you can actually go and find it accurately wherever it's sitting at, it's always going to be sitting there. It's a ticking time bomb. It's the exact same thing of having that virus that's sitting in your backup. So when you try to go in and rehydrate that, you just bring it right back, right? Like, some of the more classical cybersecurity problems, it's just the next version of that, when this compliance for a specific type of data got interjected into the rest of the ecosystem.
Dewayne, I know you've been involved specifically using the Teramis tool to help customers, everything from answer CID to helping them understand scope, right? I mean, like, moving into an environment, how do I know what I have to address for CMMC compliance and ITAR? So I'm going to ask you to sort of talk about the problem of fidelity and veracity. We Cape Endeavors have struggled with customers who have literally hundreds of millions of files. It defies human ability to inspect and find out where that is, and the tools that are available are so low fidelity that they don't really solve that problem. So, or they give you such a high false positive rate, you're going through a bunch of data anyway, right? It just doesn't scale for human to do, and the tools out there aren't very good with the fidelity of the results. But can you give us sort of, like, you've been using this tool now in customers large and small, as a professional service. Can you give us sort of an indication of how well it's addressing that problem set?
It addresses it very well, and here's the rationale I've come up with this. It was purpose built to do what it does, right? So you take these other discovery tools, they're purpose built to be generalists. You're taking now a very surgical approach to the problem with a tool like Teramis, right? So it's apples and oranges when you're comparing it to other discovery tools. You're able to get very specific on where you need to look. You can get as broad as you need to on where you need to look, but what you're going to get back is the results that you need to make some decisions. And that's what I've enjoyed about it, is being able to confidently take a list of findings and going back to a client saying, this is all we've got to worry about, this particular batch here, right? So let's figure out the methodology we're going to use to get it over to your secure environment. The experience I've had trying to force other things into finding this stuff and using generic query language and regex and things like that in these other tools it's just too broad, man. It just shows up in a lot of false positives that ultimately, if you think about it, you're going to pay. You're talking about the money thing, right? If you have to go spend a whole bunch of time validating your findings, you got human capital you're spending in that. If you're going to say, forget it, I'm not validating, I'm just going to move all of this, then you've got infrastructure that you've got to get, not only the pipeline to get it from one place to the other, but you've got to also have the ability to store it and retain it and back it up and do all the things that come with that, right? So the targeted nature of this, right, the specialization of it, the surgical approach to it is why I really enjoy using a tool like Teramis and have no problem putting it in any client, any size.
We had a podcast with Zach Terwilliger from Vincent and Elkins, and he is actually representing several companies who are targets of CID from the Department of Justice under false claims. Like, remember, folks, this is KETAM, which means a whistleblower initiated this. And here's the crux. If a whistleblower thinks that there's CUI everywhere because the tools are using lack fidelity and they're creating a huge false positive set, it has the appearance that there's a huge problem, in the enterprise, and actually has created sort of a false narrative and a false attestation on the opposite end, meaning that look, we got CUI everywhere when it's really not everywhere, and so that's created a problem. And the cost of trying to address a CID can bankrupt a company. It's a significant hurdle for a large company. It will put a small company out of business. But in the remaining time that we kind of have, I want to pitch back over to you, Brandon, sort of for the last question. So knowing that a False Claim Act, is probably the worst thing that can happen from this, or data breach where actually a threat actor's got your data. Those two are pretty high on the cost remediation and existential threats to the business. But can you sort of talk about what are the 4 use cases that Teramis was really designed to address in the marketplace?
Yeah, so first and foremost, scoping. I think all of us on here have talked about scoping throughout the call, because if you don't understand where your boundary is and the proper scope, then you're really just kind of shooting in the dark of what you need to do next. From that, you're going to have the spillage management. So if you've decided to move forward with an enclave, we're all human beings. People are going to email your .com email address because that's what they're used to. So you need to make sure that data does go to your secure environment, right, so that you don't have any problems there. And like Andy mentioned earlier, we're taking that from an incident to vulnerability management, which is a huge thing for a business to actually be able to do, is plan ahead and know that they, inside their spillage management plan, how they're going to handle when something does spill over, because inevitably it will. Then third and foremost is post-breach. So unfortunately, companies are going to be breached. We talked about that earlier, and we've been using breach scenarios where firms will take our software, scan the data that has been affected by the threat actor, and then answer the true question of, is there anything really to worry about from the data that has been exfiltrated from that company? That's one big thing that people don't know answers to in a very timely manner, i.e. most incident response breach activities are not figured out from what has actually truly been affected for weeks, if not months, right, depending upon the size of the breach. Teramis provides something in a very, very short time period so that those businesses can make the right decisions on what they need to do next.
Andy, how do we know the fidelity and veracity of the Teramis tool is accurate? Like, how do we know that? What's the points of proof that you have for the Teramis solution?
Yeah, so when we were initially developing it, we were leveraging heavily on the ANSI standards for what qualifies as a validated and acceptable quality level of scan results that came in to ensure that we were hitting what we could actually say is a high fidelity scan result. And then through some of the use of these CID cases where we've actually then had millions of files scanned going down to maybe just 1,000 files that are found type of a thing, and then having that be actually reviewed manually by lawyers confirming that, and coming out of that from in the wild stuff, achieving 99.95% true positive to total finding ratios, where everything that we're finding is in fact a CUI, and then even going back through and doing manual validation to ensure that there are no false negatives inside of that list. So it's kind of two-part. One in the design and how we initially structured building out the product, and then two, just as circumstance happening to be in situations where we were provided with real-world examples that had to be doing this anyways to take the time to actually do manual validation of these findings to help ensure that it was actually meeting the standards and the mechanisms that we're achieving.
Andy, a question for you. We hear a lot about the costs of setting up and doing this correctly, but we also have the time to address it. And we've had customers come to us after spending, literally years trying to get compliant, not succeeding. Can you give us an example of how these two solutions came together in a rapid fashion? Like what's in the realm of possible for getting compliant?
Yeah, we actually recently had a joint customer that it was like the case study of what appropriate scoping can actually do for you. So we went in, we scanned, Teramis was utilized to identify their scope, and this customer was able to, because they had good scope, because they immediately knew the users, they knew the applications, they knew the data, the types, and the locations of where that data was. Dewayne and his team was able to actually build an enclave. We were able to put the correct applications and migrate the data in based off of that scan result. And that customer actually was able to go through an assessment, and all that occurred within 8 weeks from start to finish. That's the power of knowing what it is that you're building out the gate, instead of just trying to fill it out and assemble that plane as you're flying it in the air, or any of those other kind of sayings you've heard. If you know it, if I know the users, I know the applications, I know the exact data, and I know where it all is, building out the enclave then is easy. And moving the data in, once you know where it is it's a PowerShell script right at that point to get that stuff in there. So you can do this very, very quickly once you have good scoping, and that technical discovery is what enables that. Otherwise, you're going to spend more than 8 weeks just trying to figure out who to interview inside of your company to even get the ball rolling.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's really cool about what happened with that use case is this wasn't 5 people. This was tens of thousands of people, right? That had to be reviewed and understood on what needed to be done, and then the environment built. So we bring scale, we bring efficiency, we bring cost effectiveness to the CMMC and ecosystem.
Outstanding. And like in final comment, Cape Endeavors, of course, shares one thing in common with Teramis, is that we're tailor-made for what we address in the marketplace. Cape Endeavors is a laser-focused CMMC compliant and secure solution that's turnkey, and Teramis is laser-focused on helping you scope, define, and find CUI accurately and reducing your costs and investment thereof. So Cape helping to invest your investment in infrastructure and getting compliant, and Teramis, and of course keeping the wolves at bay from mishandling CUI, whether that be through for scoping, infrastructure identification, user identification, and/or God forbid you have to answer the mail for a CID or a breach, having high fidelity results. Gentlemen, thank you. As always, it's an honor and pleasure to work with you all.